Great. Does it look like my presentation is up now?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so Lee was in a bit of a transition. I'm just going to call out and just check in with Lee and see if you're able to get back on. Are you with us yet, Lee?
I'm here now. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, great. Good morning. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and get started then. This morning we're going to be talking about the Iowa State Revolving Fund program. And a little bit of the background with the SRF program is both the Clean Water and the Drinking Water Acts authorize these SRF programs. They are administered by the state, but we have oversight by the EPA. The Clean Water Act was amended in 1987, which created the Clean Water SRF Fund, and federal regulations were developed. Iowa made its first loan in 1990. Then about 10 years later, the Safe Drinking Water Act followed. They amended the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1996 and created the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And then we made our first loans there in about 2000. The purpose was to replace the construction grants that we had. So this was to be a funding source created in perpetuity and doing away with grants, making it available for us to provide low interest loans as a form of financial assistance. So these programs are both built by framework of eligibility under federal law. So we have a federal an eligibility handbook that we follow with both programs individually. And over the years, these programs have changed quite a bit. So in 2014, in particular, our Clean Water program had some significant changes, which opened up the doors of eligibility and what we could do with this program. Same thing over the years with drinking water. And it seems every year we have some type of change, either through reauthorization, through appropriations, or amendments to the acts themselves. But what it really comes down to is that each state can set its own priorities and set its own structure, depending on what they think is going to work the best for the state and what the needs are for the individuals within that state. So between the years 1989 and 2002, all we were doing was issuing low interest loans for water and wastewater infrastructure. But when some of those changes occurred and opened up eligibility flexibilities, that created a lot of new opportunity for us. So a change in the state law authorizing SRF programs allowed us to develop a number of different types of programs that targeted a variety of water quality issues and the audiences that those would impact. So we can make loans now to farmers for soil, sediment, and nutrient control practices. We can finance the replacement of on-site septic systems for homeowners. We can help communities deal with stormwater management, brownfields, and landfills. And then the newest of our programs is down in the right-hand corner. It's mentioned as our sponsored project program. And Lee will be telling us a lot more about that later on. So the SRF program really is one of Iowa's primary sources for financing their drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, as well as stormwater water quality projects and non-point source protection practices in the watershed. In Iowa, we co-administer this program with the Iowa Finance Authority. So the Department of Natural Resources handles a lot of the project eligibility, design approval, planning and permitting, environmental review, and ensuring that we're within federal compliance with the capitalization grant that seeds this program. The Iowa Finance Authority then takes care of everything financial. They issue bonds for us, they do loan approvals and disbursements, and they also help out with one of our federal regulations, which is the fair wages, the Davis-Bacon wage determinations. So this is really just a diagram of how this works. I'm going to see if my pointer will work. Let's see. So up in the right-hand corner here, you'll see we get a federal capitalization grant. Each year, the DNR will apply for the CAP grant. And historically, the Clean Water program has been getting around $21 million a year. The Drinking Water program has been getting around $17.5 million a year. And we take those funds, deposit them into our revolving fund account. From that, we're doing two different things. We will issue loans. And so some of the proceeds will go out to those lenders, and then those proceeds, that principal, will be returned with their repayments as well as interest back into this. Can you see that pointer that I'm doing or not? Will go back into the fund and it will revolve and be available for the next loan to go out. But what we're also doing in addition to that is we're issuing leverage bonds. We're leveraging our entire portfolio. We are borrowing for not only what we believe we're going to need in the future for loans, but we're also borrowing for the state match against those federal grants. So in the big picture, we get that 20 million for clean water, that 17 million for drinking water, but last year, we actually had over $300 million in binding commitments. So you can see how just the nature of bonding with this program allows it to continue to grow and make funds available. So our SRF program, because of leveraging, has the capacity to fund every eligible project. At this point, we don't have to turn anyone away as long as the project meets the eligibility requirements of the grant. Of the capitalization grant, or of the program as a whole. We issue loans. So cumulatively, we broke the $4 billion mark this last year. So we currently, since the inception of this program, have loaned out $4.2 billion to communities to improve their water and their wastewater systems. You can kind of see from this map just kind of how spread out we are and how widely used the program is across the state. And I think I'll just kind of talk to you about some of the products that we're offering our citizens. So one of the first things that we are so proud to be able to offer is a 0% financing planning and design loan. This is offered to them for 3 years. They don't have to make any payments during the design phase of this. And when they're ready to move on to construction, we give them the option of either staying with us and having construction loan with the SRF program. They can roll their planning and design loan into that, or they can just pay it off and then use their whatever other funding source is best for their situation. But this allows these small communities a source of funding to actually hire an engineer and get some of this process started. So our actual products that we offer for drinking water and wastewater both are the same. We offer low interest loans at 1.75% interest rate for 20 years. We will offer extended financing up to 30 years at 2.75%. And then we have a 0.25% servicing fee on outstanding principal. But if one of our communities is considered disadvantaged, which I will talk about a little bit more as well, they can get that lower interest rate for the extended term at 1.75 for 30 years. We don't have a reserve requirement, which is very helpful to our small community borrowers who don't have a lot of money in the bank. We also have a 110 debt ratio coverage, which is much less than open market. And then their first principal payment is due usually within about 12 months of the project completion. Because of the revolving nature of our funds, they at some point begin to lose their federal identity. And so they have the ability to use SRF funding as match against other federal programs. So we do a lot of co-funding with the Community Development Block Grant for water, wastewater, and some stormwater quality projects. But projects can use our P&D loan. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they use that to get ready for financing through USDA or maybe a different avenue. But we do, and we're seeing this a lot more recently. We're doing some co-funding where we hadn't done this before. Some of our communities that really are stretched and the user rate might be still too high by using one program or the other. USDA Rural Development and the SRF program have been partnering together so that we're co-financing the same project. So they may have the opportunity that way to have a low interest loan with extended term financing through SRF qualify for some loan forgiveness, and then also finance a portion of their project with a loan through USDA, but then they would qualify for grants through USDA. So collectively, it's making their user rates come down to an affordable level for that community. And we have a water infrastructure finance committee formed between the CDBG program, the USDA rural development, and the SRF staff in Iowa. And so we meet quarterly so that we can talk about these kind of projects and try to make these projects more affordable for our communities. So I mentioned disadvantaged communities. Right now in our drinking water program, the qualification basis for being considered disadvantaged is if they meet 51% of their community is low to moderate income. That matches the CDBG requirements and criteria as well. So it makes it very easy for our borrowers to understand kind of across the board what they might be eligible for in additional discounts with our program as well as CDBG. Then in our wastewater system, we have a formula basis for this, and it's based off of determining if the ratepayers or the community will experience substantial and widespread economic and social impact as a result of having to comply with a wastewater regulation. So they have an option of applying for disadvantaged community status or either an extended compliance schedule or for reduced rates through the SRF program. And that's based on rates and in addition to many other things, but it's based on rates compared to the median home income and the overall individual project cost. So we offer, as I mentioned, infrastructure projects funding as well as non-point source funding. So I'm going to go through kind of both of our programs and what they offer for our infrastructure. Just starting first with our drinking water program, communities can come to us, public water supply systems can come to us to do improvements to their public water supply system, to the facility itself. They can come to us if they want assistance with consolidating or connecting to another public water supply system. And these systems include distributions, treatment, storage, transmissions, all types of things, including metering. I remember hearing some questions about that earlier. That can help determine user rates too in the community. And then with the drinking water program, when it was developed originally, it was developed with a little bit different focus. They recognized that not all water programs can be solved with a brick and mortar facility. And so when it was developed, they just allowed the CAP grant, the states to set aside 26% of the CAP grant that we apply for to maintain the state drinking water program that assists the public water supply systems with establishing and maintaining technical, managerial, and financial stability. So these set-asides will also help with source water protection planning and implementation too. So this is that same diagram that I showed earlier. But what I wanted to show with this is when the funds are revolving, we have the opportunity to pull them out for the wastewater pollution control projects, which are our infrastructure projects. But with clean water, they also allow us to do non-point source water pollution control. So when we're issuing loans for these publicly owned wastewater treatment facilities, they're improving their sewer systems, either building or rehabbing what's existing. We are helping to create new systems for unsewered communities. And our non-point source funding is then available for doing agricultural best management practices, green infrastructure projects, and then we also use it in Iowa for our sponsored project program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these non-point source projects. But first of all, just wanting to touch on the non-point source definition, making sure everybody understands what we're talking about. Basically, non-point source is non-point sources of water are water sources that come from rainfall or snow melt. As it moves over and across the grounds, it's picking up all types of pollution and sedimentation. It carries away both natural and human-made pollutants, and then ultimately we'll deposit them into lakes, rivers, wetlands, and groundwaters. So we want to be able to control those storm waters, or at least impact the quality of the water before it goes into our rivers and streams and lakes. So in our non-point source program, we actually have 4 different funding avenues that we make available for our customers. We will do a direct loan with them. We have a loan participation program. We have link deposit programs that reach down to the individual homeowner, and we have the sponsored project program. So I'm going to touch on the first 3, and then Lee is going to finish us off with talking about sponsored projects.
Hey, Theresa, can I just jump in real quick?
Absolutely. Yes.
Just for everybody's information, the reason for these different types of funding is to be able to reach out to different borrowers for different needs. For the main direct loans, SRF federal requirements require that usually be a public entity. We can't, in our state rules, say that we cannot directly loan to a private borrower. So for that reason, we kind of copied what other people have done and created these link deposits and loan participation processes by which a private borrower, landowner, would use their local lending institution, and then we would deposit a depository note at that bank in order to buy down that interest rate for the borrowers. So, and there's more detailed descriptions of how like these non-traditional funding mechanisms work, kind of in the EPA guidance, and we could explain more if there's questions at the end too.
Okay. Before I start breaking out and talking about each of those, I just wanted to mention the success of our non-point source programs and the usage of it. Since we started offering these non-point source loans in 2003, the programs have grown fairly rapidly. So we are through fiscal year 2021 for our general non-point source and sponsor project programs and our link deposit programs. We have lended out over almost $330 million for these practices. So direct loans, those are the ones, again, that are going to public entities. They're going to watershed organizations, conservation organizations, landfills, and others. When we issue our loans, we require them to be backed by bonds or some type of taxing authority. That's our guarantee for repayment. And so that's why that direct loan relationship requires that we have those type of recipients. But some of the eligible practices that we do with a direct loan include landfill closures. We can do habitat and wetland restoration, brownfield cleanup, lake restoration, watershed planning, green infrastructure, and other types of agricultural best management practices as well. Just specifically, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing to add on there is that the main usage of this general non-point source direct loans has been primarily used by cities for the most part for green infrastructure type practices and stream restoration type practices. Yeah. But there are other eligibilities there, and we have done landfill closure and some wetland habitat work too. Yep. Yeah.
Just kind of expanding on what the expectations for our green infrastructure funding is it all has to have a water quality benefit. A lot of times it can't just be for stormwater management, it has to actually have a treatment element too. So we've done a lot of permeable paving projects, we've done some stream daylighting, lots of bioretention cells, rain gardens, bioswales. We have a partnership with our Department of Agricultural Land Development, or our Department of Agricultural Land Stewardship, urban conservationists. They help do technical support on these projects, and they're also reviewed by our conservation districts. Oh, went blank there for a minute. Okay, loan participation. So this has been interesting. Between 2005 and 2019, the SRF program partnered with the Iowa National Heritage Foundation on 35 different SRF loan agreements using the Iowa Loan Participation Program. In doing so, INHF acquired more than 10,000 acres of land for water quality protection and conservation practices with an overall investment in SRF of over $38 million. What I have on the screen here is an example of one of the projects. This was a 436 acre mixture of Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, pasture, cropland, and woodland. The lower segment of this property, the South Skunk River flows through this property, and it's on the Iowa's Impaired Waters list due to high bacterial content. So some of the practices that were put on this or intend to be put on here were protection and restoration of the native vegetation. So that's going to manage some of the downstream flooding and reduce the non-point source pollution that was entering the South Skunk River. And also restoration of crop fields back to wetlands and native prairie is providing that permanent restoration of this area. So a permanent water quality benefit can be maintained.
And Theresa, just to jump in with a little bit more on the background of this is, this particular program came about through a joint venture that the DNR was doing with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, Fish and Wildlife Service, and a few others. That was this prairie pothole joint venture, and it was intended to identify and prioritize pothole areas in Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, that were high priority areas for purchasing and restoring these areas. And so what they needed was a quick way to be able to purchase these lands or these high priority properties when they came on the market. And so this created a mechanism whereby INHF, which is a private entity, is able to, act quickly, quicker than state or federal agencies could to purchase properties. And then they hold the properties until those federal funds or state funds or those agencies are able to move those funds to purchase them from INHF. So it provided a mechanism whereby conservation agencies could really jump on the market and get these high priority areas. And most of these areas were either in floodplain, they're low quality crop ground, or they're immediately adjacent to a wetland or lake or other water body. So a lot of times they're marginal farm ground. And so INHF and the federal agencies or state agencies that are actually purchasing these were able to offer fair market price for these, whereas a lot of times the landowners would be selling these, if a private borrower was buying them at a much lower price, and then they would remain in crop ground. So it's been a really good mechanism to get high priority marginal crop ground out of production. Unfortunately, this has become a challenge due to some state legislation that has happened that limits our ability to do this. And again, we can touch base on that later in questions, but I'll throw it back to Theresa.
Thanks. Appreciate you adding that to it. And we really did have a good partnership with them. Okay, next I'm going to talk about our link deposit programs. This is the ones that can reach down and touch the homeowners at that level. So we administer our programs in partnership with IDALS through an intergovernmental agreement. And then there's also partnerships that we have within that where the individual projects are approved by different our environmental agencies, DNR, IDALS, NRCS, the conservation districts, etc. So we have 4 programs: local water protection program, livestock water quality program, stormwater program, and our on-site wastewater assistance. These provide low interest loans that make investments in conservation affordable for the individual homeowner. These systems allow each applicant to work with their own preferred lender to fund the conservation practice that works for them. So some types of these practices include preventing soil erosion to allow sustainable crop production, reducing sediment runoff to streams and lakes, retaining nutrients on field to benefit crop production, reducing pollutant losses from agricultural land in urban areas. And then even our on-site wastewater program is just helping homeowners to repair and replace their septic systems. As Lee mentioned, these borrowers get to work with their own local lender. So they're already comfortable working with maybe their own bank, and the bank takes on the responsibility of handling all the loan servicing. We will deposit the funds in the bank of their choice at 0% interest. We just require that the bank cannot charge more than 3% interest. And so our program doesn't profit from this program, but we get our initial investment back. So it's at no loss to us, but this can be used with cost share and with EQIP and with other grants. So it's definitely beneficial for our homeowner users and individual landowner users. Okay, I'm going to move on to sponsored projects unless you have anything else you want to add to link deposits, Lee.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself.
It's okay.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, well, then I'm going to turn it over to Lee to talk about our water resource restoration sponsored project program.
Great. So in Iowa, we learn from other innovators. We did not create the concept of sponsored projects. There were several other innovators before us, namely Ohio, who is, kind of who we kind of mimicked or copied our mechanism from, but we kind of made it our own, and looked at what the needs in Iowa were, what kind of the process was, or what would best work for Iowa, as far as we thought. And so one of the first things that we had to do was work with Iowa legislature to change Iowa finance law, which stated that sewer revenues could only be used for replacement or repair of existing or new wastewater treatment facilities or conveyance. And so working with the Iowa legislature, we were able to change that to allow financing for a certain category, which are called these water resource restoration sponsored projects. And these are defined in Iowa code as locally directed watershed-based projects to address non-point source water pollution issues. And we started implementing, or the program is implemented through our Clean Water SRF program. The Clean Water SRF can be used for has eligibilities for both point source, like wastewater treatment plant projects, and non-point source, which is pretty much anything else that, not directly discharged through a pipe. So we did our original pilot project with the city of Dubuque in 2013. And then that was just to kind of test out the mechanism and make sure everything worked. And then we opened up to other communities in 2014. And the next slide will kind of talk about and illustrate the funding mechanism here. And so the sponsored project funds are made available through an interest rate reduction on the associated wastewater loan. And our current wastewater loans are generally at an interest rate of 1.75%. And we allow up to 1% of the interest to be reduced and then used for a sponsored project. So approximately $100,000 per $1 million borrowed can be used for one of these watershed-based non-point source water quality projects. So
Do you want me to advance?
Yeah, so the graph here just kind of illustrates that funding mechanism. If you look at the bar on the left, that's a traditional wastewater loan, with the blue representing the principal for the wastewater project, and the black or dark purple, I can't quite tell, represents the fees and interest that they would pay over the 20 years term of the loan. And on the right, it shows that with a sponsored project, the interest rate is reduced, the black portion, and then the green portion shows, how that interest is replaced with principal for this sponsored project. And then if we go to the next slide, it's just kind of another illustration of that same type of thing that shows kind of the pie chart of what's normally borrowed and paid back over the full 20 years of a typical clean water SRF loan. And then the next slide has kind of a description that essentially says that with the sponsored project, the city ends up paying back the same amount for a wastewater project and a non-point source project to address a water quality concern within the watershed in which the utility is located, as they would have if they just did the wastewater project and paid back that loan. So really they're getting, 2 water quality projects for the price of 1.
Yeah.
And then this is just a blown up illustration of that other bar chart showing how the breakdown works.
Yeah.
So if we go into kind of the requirements for our sponsored projects, first they have to be watershed-based projects. So the projects start with a watershed assessment. And what we hope that the applicants will do with this is they will assess their watershed based on, local water quality concerns that are important to the city or the community or whoever, and then use that water quality or that watershed assessment to really identify the priority locations to address those water quality concerns, and then identify what practices could be done and are feasible for the city to do in order to address that water quality concern. And in order to be eligible for a sponsored project, a wastewater utility has to have a project on our current intended use plan, approved intended use plan project list, and must still be in the planning phase. And the reason for that is these watershed projects, as many of you know, can take a long time to develop. And so because of the funding mechanism, we want to make sure there's time, to allow for proper planning and design of these projects before the cities start paying back on their wastewater loan, which can reduce the amount of funding they have available. So our next slide just kind of illustrates the types of projects that have been done by some of our borrowers, and it kind of is a full gamut of different things, and it depends on really what the goals are of the city and the water quality concern for that city or for that community and watershed. So we do see a lot of green infrastructure, permeable paving, bioretention cells, tree trench
Rain gardens.
type things. Yeah. And then stormwater wetlands as well. And then we have done a considerable amount of stream restoration and floodplain reconnection, floodplain conservation, restoring areas to, back to natural areas as well. And this next map is kind of, pretty impressive. And the notes that I have here are a little outdated, but the map, it shows our projects through fiscal year 2021. And the funding that we have that we have made available for sponsored projects, I believe through, I'm gonna have to do this by memory, but through 2021, I believe was about $81 million. And I think that was around 120 projects, 121 projects and one state park, or 121 projects, and it was like 90 some different applicants and a state park. So, and that's just in 8 years. So, we've really been able to get a lot of participation. It is definitely a very popular program in Iowa. And, as you could see from the different types of projects they've done, very useful for addressing different types of non-point source issues. So now we'll go into some examples of some of the projects we've done. And this is an example of our first pilot project in Dubuque. And Dubuque had done an enormous wastewater treatment plant upgrade that was something like $70 million. And so Dubuque is, for those of you not familiar, Dubuque is located on the Mississippi River near Wisconsin and Illinois. And, due to that proximity to the river, of course, like many river towns, they have different issues with stormwater runoff. And Dubuque has a very, I think it's a very neat, kind of geography to it and topography. There's areas that are very highly bluffed along the river, and they're limestone bluffs, and all that water runs down into these areas in the floodplains along the river. And so that created some unique challenges for the city as far as stormwater handling. And so what they decided to do was implement a permeable paver alley program. And they did something like 74 alleys with permeable pavers. And, this made a huge reduction in surface flooding. They used to see a lot of surface flooding just from, marginal storm events. And this really was part of a larger project that we'll talk about in this next slide with the Dubuque B Branch watershed stream daylighting program that was, a lot of you have probably heard about this, and if you're interested, they have a great website that talks about all the stuff they have done. But the idea was that Dubuque had this stormwater problem coming through the B Branch watershed because hundreds of years ago they had taken this stream and put it in a pipe and buried it, and then the pipe was undersized. They would have storms and there would be, storm drain, storm drain manholes like blowing and streets flooding and people's houses flooding and stuff like that. And so they looked at this in a really holistic way and decided, what can they do? And they decided on this daylighting project, which took the stream out of this pipe, opened it back up, created a natural floodplain, a natural channel And some of the ancillary benefits of that was additional green space within the area. And as far as some environmental justice issues, it really helped add amenities to a really underserved population and area. And I think these numbers aren't, because the project has continued, but I think the total cost going into B branch was around $232 million, which was from 12 different state and federal funding agencies contributing about $162 million. And SRF had,
About 70 in this
about $70 million in
this part of the project.
Yep, in loans and sponsored project funds to the project. So just wanted to kind of highlight how our different programs can kind of work together to create opportunities for different types of projects. So and the next example I want to talk about is the city of Clinton. Clinton is also located on the Mississippi River further downstream, and they have a consent decree requiring them to separate combined sewers. And combined sewers are when the wastewater and storm sewers are combined, and then there are overflows that discharge directly to rivers, untreated wastewater, when there's high storm flows and those types of things. And so that has been a priority, and of course federally and in Iowa, to get these combined sewers separated, and so that we aren't discharging untreated wastewater to rivers. So part of what Clinton was doing was separating these storm sewers, but they also wanted to provide treatment for their stormwater runoff in a historic district in the downtown area. And so they installed a combination of permeable pavers and stormwater planters, and I believe even a couple bioretention cells when they went in and separated the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer in order to provide stormwater treatment to the newly separated stormwater discharge. And then in North Liberty, our next example, they did a couple different things, but we're gonna kind of talk about one program that was very unique and kind of the first one that we had done with them or with anyone in Iowa, and has kind of become something that's been copied by some other communities as well. And one of the main things in Iowa that we see is, Iowa has great topsoil, and that's really great for actually handling and preventing stormwater runoff, because of the organic matter in that topsoil, it's able to absorb and hold that water, and then allow it to infiltrate into the ground. Well, of course, developers have figured out that, hey, this topsoil, we can, when we're developing new homes and developments, we can strip this topsoil off and sell it. And so that's kind of common practice in Iowa, that a lot of newer subdivisions and things like that have very small amounts of topsoil. And so the sod is laid right on top of, more clay material, and does not infiltrate as well. And so there's a lot more issues with stormwater runoff. So what North Liberty wanted to do is implement a cost share program to incentivize homeowners to do soil quality restoration. And this is a practice where a contractor would come out and do deep tine aeration of the yard, and then spread compost throughout the yard, which will then get the the grass will grow through that compost, and it strengthens the roots, and then it adds more organic matter, and the aerating of the ground also allows that compost to get down and break up that hard clay material as well, which also aids infiltration. And so it really adds to the ability for stormwater treatment to occur at a residential level. And so we worked with them to create this this cost share program that's administered by the city, where they have certified contractors that come out. A homeowner does that, the city then inspects it, and then the city reimburses the resident up to a certain amount for the work that was done. And in this picture, you can see the property on the left did not have soil quality restoration done, and the one on the right did, and you can just see how much more lush and green that yard is. And that's also an indication of the health of the grass and the soil and its ability to hold and retain water. So it also has the added benefit of reducing the necessity for folks to fertilize their yards, which is also a large contributor to urban stormwater pollution. Our next project was in the town of Reedland, and I'm going to try and go through this quickly, but this is a really great story where the city originally had proposed doing some stormwater bioretention cells in right-of-way in a certain neighborhood, and they just assumed that the residents would be okay with it, didn't really communicate with them very much. And then when they came out to do preliminary staking, all the people came out and said, whoa, what is going on? We don't want, you're going to take away our right-of-way area. And, the residents, just because there wasn't good communication up front, were instantly against it. So Reedland had to kind of like redirect and come up with something completely different. And through cooperation with the local SWCD and NRCS district conservationist and our urban conservation team at IDALS, the city found this great opportunity to do a stormwater wetland. And this was co-funded with state water quality initiative funds. It was in a downstream area of town, and I believe it treats 75% of the runoff from the town before it gets discharged into a drainage ditch that then goes to I forget the water body, but and then once the landowner, the agricultural landowner next to this property, saw this wetland going in, he contacted the district conservationist to say, hey, is there something we can do about the drainage ditch that this wetland discharges into, because it's not in good shape, and all sorts of stuff. And so kind of a added benefit of this project is it engaged another landowner to do more conservation work on their property, whereby he worked with that NRCS district conservationist to then put in a grassed waterway and stream buffer to better handle the flows coming out of this wetland and provide additional treatment and conveyance. So it was a great example of what we really want to see out of public-private partnership, in my opinion. Donaldson is the next example. This is another one where there's a good public-private partnership. The city had a wastewater treatment plant upgrade, and they used part of their sponsored project funds to do a bioswale and urban stream stabilization practice in town. But then they also committed approximately $20,000 through a cooperative agreement with the Lee County Soil and Water Conservation District to do a cover crop program in the watershed immediately upstream of the city to help keep, soil and nutrients on the ground and keep those from coming into the watershed from the upstream area. And the idea was to kind of pilot that project and then hopefully get those landowners, those agricultural producers, to continue with those programs and utilize cover crops more routinely. And I think it has helped out, especially as a demonstration, not just for that area, but for the county in general. Another one that is a really fun project that we always like to use as an example. I used to have the link on here and I don't, but it's just a really cool video. The city of Monona had just stormwater issues where they're kind of a high spot in town and water would flow very quickly into a tributary of I'm forgetting the name of it now, but the water would flow very quickly downstream and be very erosive to the stream bank. So, pulling that sediment and nutrients that are bound in that sediment and washing it downstream. Also, just creating, aesthetically unpleasing stream characteristics as well, and instability in the stream. So they had a gravel parking lot where a lot of this water ran through, and they were able to convert it to permeable pavers. And the pictures here are still pictures from a video that we did where this they brought a fire truck out and dumped 2,000 gallons of water onto the practice to show how quickly it infiltrates. And you do not have rain events that happen like this, but if you look at that top photograph, it shows this is just, it took about probably 2 minutes for that to drain. So, we're talking about, 1,000 gallons a minute coming down. That just doesn't come from the sky. But you look at, where the water went in this permeable paver, it literally only traveled 12 feet at most, before it went into the ground. Whereas if this was a impervious surface, you would have, 2,000 gallons of water just standing there and then flowing straight off into the stream. So it was a really cool way to demonstrate how effective permeable paving is at infiltrating water into the ground. And then another example of the types of things that we can do, this, is a really great project. It is not captured in this photo. The before photo is a cut bank that is nearly vertical, and it was almost 60 feet. And this is on the Soldier Creek in Fort Dodge. And there were several reasons that the city was doing this. So there's multiple benefit. This is in a park, Snell Crawford Park, which is actually, a highly used area. And then on top of this, this bank were some residential houses that were losing backyards, a shed, different things. And each time there was a major event, you have a huge slug of sediment getting washed down through Soldier Creek and into the Des Moines River. And so Fort Dodge used their sponsored project opportunity to address this, where they did some stream stabilization practice practices where they realign the stream to move it away from the bank a little bit, and then they used soil lifts and a number of other different mechanisms to restore that that bank, and then put native vegetation in there so that those roots would hold the soil in place to hopefully prevent future erosion occurring there. And then our next example is in
Lee, just a minute.
sure.
I'm not sure how many you've got. We may be able to get to all of them. But we did intend to go to 120. And then
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
questions and answers. Although I think all of us are fascinated with these projects. It might be a good time now to take some questions and answers. If there are not any, then we'll keep going into your
Sure. Absolutely.
projects. But let's take a little break, and there will be a longer break at the end of this in about 10 minutes for people to eat lunch or whatever you need to do. But let's open it up right now and see if we can get some discussion. If not, if you've got more slides to show us, we'll finish what you've got to show us.
I think this is the last project example and we were wrapping up. You want to, let's just finish out? Yeah.
All right, I'll go to Des Moines.
So the city of Des Moines, this is just another illustration of the different types of stuff we can do, but the city of Des Moines has several smaller watersheds within its boundaries, and 4 Mile Creek is one in which they have had significant flooding issues that damage homes, and then also creates a lot of stormwater issues as well. And so part of their project was to identify and try and buy out some of the homes that were within the floodplain and flooded frequently, and then in doing so, create a green belt in a floodplain buffer for the stream to naturally flood and flow through, where it wouldn't create as many stormwater pollution issues and things like that. And so the city, I believe, identified and purchased about 20 some houses, and those houses were removed, and then the grade was restored and vegetation was restored. And eventually, once they get all the houses that they want to, it'll be a much bigger project where they'll do native plantings and maybe a nature playscape or those types of things. So just another example of the types of water quality issues that can be identified and addressed with the sponsored projects.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Yeah, we just wanted to give you a taste of all the types of flexibility and opportunities that our funding can be used for addressing not just point source at the drinking water and the wastewater facilities, but outside in the watershed as well. So we intend to continue to use the flexibilities of our programs to keep creating new opportunities for our borrowers to achieve these drinking water standards and to reduce the amount of nutrients and other types of pollutants that are entering our waterways. My last slide is just a shout out for our own website. If you go to www.iowasrf.com, there's a lot more of information available about our programs. So that concludes, and we are ready to take some questions.
Thank you. That was an amazing presentation. Esther, do you have questions teed up?
So I saw one question in the chat from Anne. It says, can permeable pavers be designed to provide filtration? And I think the presentation answered that, but if there's any other information you want to offer about permeable pavers, feel free.
Sure, yeah. So the design in Iowa, we require all of our, whether it's sponsored project or whether it's funded through our general non-point source or stormwater best management link deposit program, to follow the standards in the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual. And the way they're designed, there's the permeable pavers, several different layers of rock underneath it. And as the water infiltrates through that, it removes the sediment and the bacteria within that, those layers of filtration rock also will provide some treatment to reduce, the grease and oils and nutrients that are carried along in the permeable in stormwater. And once that water goes into the rock chamber underneath the permeable pavers, it slows it down, and the water has to kind of, follow an indirect path before it gets to under drain, or it just infiltrates into the ground. So it does filter the water, and then it also ideally, instead of it discharging to a stormwater pipe, will actually infiltrate back into the groundwater.
Thank you very much for that explanation. There are no other questions in the chat, but if you would like to ask a question verbally, feel free to do that.
Esther, is anybody ahead of me?
I don't think it's just with your hand raised.
I'm fascinated with this presentation, and I'm have to confess that I know very little about the Kentucky SRF program, but I cannot believe that it is being used in as varied a way as you all are using the Iowa SRF program. What do you know about how other states are, you said you borrowed from Ohio, but how many states have been as creative and as flexible as you all have been? Question number one. And then another question that I didn't hear you mention, I had this memory that when Obama was doing his Save the Country efforts, the SRF monies that came to Kentucky and to every state had an explicit 10 or 20% must be used for green infrastructure requirement. I know that because I saw money designated for green infrastructure, and what it was actually being used was to put concrete in a creek around a sewer pipe that had become undercut by the creek. And so the utility was saving its sewer line by pouring concrete around the pipe to harden it more than it had been. And I said, that's not green infrastructure. And yet it was being approved as green infrastructure. Now, ultimately, my client reached a settlement with the utility, and we didn't go any further. But the green infrastructure requirement and the misuse of the green infrastructure requirement, that's what I remember about the Kentucky SRF program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me address your first question first, and Lee, hop in with your experiences as well. But when I meet with my national colleagues, there are a bunch of innovators. There are a bunch of people that want to do more. They're always looking for ways to make their programs better. And so I know Iowa shares a lot of information with other states when they're ready to move on. And I myself get lots of questions on how do we do this, or how are we able to administer this part of our program? They're interested in ever changing. And this is a group of people who do stay connected. The SRF coordinators nationally are very involved with one another. And so we take a lot of opportunity to exchange ideas. So I know that there are some other states that are really investing. Ohio comes to mind, of course, but also New Jersey is doing a lot of different things. I know even Vermont, Vermont. I know Texas, Hawaii, they're trying to get some new programs started. Oklahoma has some sponsored project programs. So there are other states that are moving in this direction. Yeah. Lee, do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, one of the things, Hank, is the SRF, like the federal eligibilities, are extremely broad, and purposefully so, is so that states are able to identify what their water quality needs are in their state. And then also the primary reason for the original development of the SRFs, at least, you know, the drinking water and clean water SRFs, were for improvements to drinking water and wastewater, you know, treatment. Now that we have gotten much better at that, you know, various different bills have passed to allow, you know, more expanded eligibilities. The problem is that a lot of states, and Iowa was like this before we changed we had to change Iowa code in order to do our non-point source programs, because originally our state only authorized the use of SRF funds for wastewater and drinking water, and that was it. And so then I think that was in 2004, 2006, that was changed to allow these other eligibilities under section 319 and 320 of the Clean Water Act. Since then, you know, the WRDA Act opened up the eligibilities for some other things. And so I guess where I'm going with that is that, you know, each state has decided at some point when they developed their SRF what their intents were. And then, you know, I know we've talked to Kentucky in the past, and I think one of the things is I don't know that they have in their capacity the ability to leverage. And leveraging makes a huge difference. In Iowa, we could not do our non-point source programs if we didn't leverage. You know, and leveraging also allows us to fund each and every eligible project that comes into us. And there's different reasons, you know, leveraging can be scary, because if you have an agency that mishandles that money, it could be a major disaster. And I think that is a big concern for some fiscally conservative states. And, you know, could be a potential reason some states don't do that. And each state develops their SRF process differently. We've talked to all sorts of different states, and some of them have very cumbersome systems. And luckily for us in Iowa, we don't, and we're able to do quite a bit of different things. So
we can turn around projects pretty quickly with our processes. I did want to touch too, Hank, on your comment about the green infrastructure. I believe it was with WRDA in 2014 is where the first mandate started coming out for green project reserve was the requirement. 10% of our clean water funding now has to be devoted to green project reserve. So there are 4 different eligibility categories. I don't know if I'll be able to remember them all offhand, but I know efficiencies is one, green infrastructure is one, resiliency is one. There's another one, I can't recall, but so green infrastructure would have been a category eligible. But yes, we are looking for those projects that we can categorize as green project reserves. And with us, all the work that we're doing in sponsored projects and general non-point source, majority of those all fit the requirements. So we're not having a problem in our state at the moment with meeting that requirement. But there's one thing that I'd like to mention, if there are no other questions, because of the previous presentations on water equality and affordability, one thing that Iowa recognized in 2015 is that maybe our smaller communities especially needed some real assistance with forward planning. You know, we're looking at small communities that are in time, they're even losing population. I mean, they're diminishing. So how, if they're taking on a 20 or a 30-year loan, how are they going to be able to afford that if their population is half of what it is at the time they take out their loan? So what we instituted was a mandate for all of our users and borrowers to hire the use of a municipal advisor. So they will help them look at their current debts. They will help them look at their current user rates. They will do forecasting for them. And then every 5 years, they provide us a new pro forma that shows how they're going to be able to continue to afford this. But that's also part of the process. And I'm sorry, let me mention too, because we require it, we also reimburse up to $4,000 for those expenses. We want them to use it. We want them to be successful. One of the things that has helped our own program for that is we don't have a default rate. We can say today we've come close once, but we've only had one real close call. We've never had a default on our loans because these loans are made responsibly, and we're ensuring that the communities can afford this before they get involved in this debt. I feel like there was something else I was going to say, but
I think that's something that some of the people on this call may not realize, that the financial stability of this program and of even our small borrowers here in Iowa. And I think one of the things that promotes that is that the people that get loans, the cities that get loans from Iowa, then issue bonds. And
Yes.
that's not everybody's capable of doing that. And then also the state gets buys them back. So I joke about that, but it's because of, I guess, our state, are using our state money and flexibility to leverage funds in other programs, as I hope everyone understood with this presentation. And we need a break.
yes. Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you
having
all.
us.
Thank you, Theresa and Lee, for your presentation. Thank you for everybody who's presented this morning. We will now be adjourned until 2 o'clock. So we have a 20-minute break, and I'll see you back on screen at 2 o'clock, and we will move into our afternoon program. Goodbye.